The Galactic Collective had existed for 3 billion years. They had found life on 12 million planets, across 17 different galaxies. They had recorded every species, every civilization, and every piece of technology in the Great Archive. The Vorton were the oldest beings in the universe, and they maintained this archive with great care. They believed they had seen everything the universe had to offer. They were wrong. Scout Commander Xyreth was on a routine mission in the outer regions of the Milky Way galaxy. His ship was small, but fast, and it carried the best detection equipment the Collective had ever built. He had been doing this job for 200 years, and he had discovered many primitive worlds during that time. Most of them had simple life forms. Some had intelligent beings who were still learning basic survival skills. None of them had ever surprised him. The signal came from a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star. Xyreth almost ignored it because the planet looked so unremarkable. It was the third planet from its sun, and it was covered mostly in water. His initial scans showed oxygen in the atmosphere and signs of biological activity. This was common enough. He had seen hundreds of similar worlds. His science officer was a young female named Thyra. She had 4 eyes, and her skin changed color based on her emotions. Right now, her skin was turning a shade of deep purple, which meant she was confused and possibly afraid. She stood at her console and her hands were shaking as she processed the incoming data. Commander Xyreth noticed her distress and walked over to her station. He was tall and thin, with an elongated skull and 3 arms. His species had evolved on a low-gravity world, and they were known for their calm and logical thinking. But even he felt something strange when he looked at the data on her screen. Thyra spoke in a trembling voice. She told him that the readings could not be accurate. She said the equipment must be broken because what she was seeing was impossible. Xyreth asked her to explain, and she took a deep breath before continuing. She told him that the dominant species on this planet called themselves humans. They lived on a world they named Earth. These humans had only discovered how to travel in space within the last 100 years of their own time measurement. This was incredibly recent, by galactic standards. Most species took thousands of years to achieve basic spaceflight after developing industrial technology. But that was not what frightened her. She explained that in that single century, these humans had developed technologies that took the Vorton 50,000 years to create. They had split the atom. They had built thinking machines. They had sent probes to other planets in their star system. They had even walked on their own moon. Xyreth felt his 2 hearts beating faster. He asked her if she was certain about these findings. She said she had checked the data 3 times, and there was no error. The humans had achieved all of this while constantly fighting wars among themselves. This detail made Xyreth feel cold inside. Every other species the Collective had observed went through a period of internal conflict before achieving unity. This was normal, but those conflicts usually ended before a species developed truly dangerous technology. The humans had done the opposite. They had built weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, and they had done so while still divided into competing nations. Xyreth ordered Thyra to send a priority transmission to the High Council immediately. He marked it with the highest level of urgency. Then he moved his ship closer to the planet while keeping his cloaking systems fully activated. He needed to observe these humans more closely. What he saw over the next several days confused him even more. The humans were constantly busy. They built massive cities, filled with millions of individuals. They created art and music that served no practical purpose. They argued about ideas and beliefs with great passion. They hurt each other, and then they helped each other. They destroyed things, and then they built new things in their place. Xyreth had studied thousands of species, but he had never seen anything like this. Most intelligent beings followed predictable patterns. They evolved, they developed technology, they achieved stability, and then they either stagnated or destroyed themselves. The humans followed no pattern at all. They were chaos given form. The response from the High Council came faster than Xyreth had expected. Within hours, his small scout ship was surrounded by over 4,000 vessels from different civilizations across the Collective. Ambassadors and scientists and military commanders had all come to see this strange blue planet for themselves. The Vorton themselves sent a delegation. This had not happened in 600 years. The ancient beings rarely left their home world because they considered most matters too trivial for their attention. But the humans had caught their interest. Ambassador Kelveth of the Sinari Dominion was among the first to arrive. His species was known for their diplomatic skills and their ability to understand other cultures. He reviewed the intelligence reports aboard his ship, and he felt a growing sense of dread with each new piece of information. He learned that the humans had built weapons called nuclear bombs. These weapons used the power of the atom itself to create explosions that could destroy entire cities. The humans had actually used 2 of these weapons against their own kind in a conflict they called World War II. Millions had died in that war, and many more had suffered. But instead of learning from this horror and destroying all such weapons, the humans had built thousands more. They pointed these weapons at each other across their divided planet. They lived every day knowing that at any moment their entire civilization could end. And yet they continued to work and play and dream as if this threat did not exist. Kelveth asked his aide how this was possible. His aide had no answer. No species in the history of the collective had ever behaved this way. Every other civilization that had developed such destructive power had used it to annihilate themselves within a single generation. The humans had possessed these weapons for nearly 80 years, and they were still alive. The ambassador stared at the blue planet on his view screen. He watched the humans going about their daily lives, completely unaware that thousands of alien ships were watching them. He saw their cities glowing with light on the dark side of the planet. He saw their aircraft crossing the skies and their ships sailing the oceans. These beings were either the most insane creatures in the universe, or they were something entirely new. Kelveth did not know which possibility frightened him more. He sent a message to the other ships in the growing fleet. He told them to maintain their positions and continue observing. He warned them not to make contact with the humans until the High Council had decided on a proper course of action. For the first time in recorded history, the entire galaxy had stopped what it was doing to focus on a single world. Every species wanted to know more about these strange beings, called humans. Every civilization wanted to understand how they had survived, when all logic said they should have destroyed themselves long ago. The galaxy had discovered Earth, and nothing would ever be the same again. On Earth, the sun rose over the Atlantic Ocean, and light spread across the eastern coast of the United States. People woke up and prepared for another ordinary day. They drank coffee and complained about the weather. They drove their cars through heavy traffic and cursed at other drivers. They worried about money and relationships and the future. None of them knew that thousands of alien vessels were watching their every move from beyond the edge of their detection systems. Captain Jake Morrison floated in the observation module of the International Space Station. He was 34 years old, with short brown hair and tired eyes that had seen too many sunrises from space to count. He had spent his entire adult life working toward this dream of living among the stars. His grandmother had planted that dream in his heart during summer nights in rural Ohio, when she would point at the sky and tell him stories about distant worlds. Dr. Laura Bennett floated up beside him. She was the chief scientist on the station, and she had become his closest friend during their time in orbit. She was 41 years old, with long black hair that she kept tied back in a practical braid. Her eyes were sharp and curious, and they never stopped searching for answers to questions most people never thought to ask. She asked Jake if he ever wondered whether anyone out there was looking back at them. He smiled and told her that he wondered about that every single day. He said that the universe was too big and too old for Earth to be the only place with intelligent life. Somewhere out there, someone else was probably looking at the stars and asking the same questions. Laura nodded and said she hoped he was right. She said that meeting another intelligent species would be the greatest moment in human history. It would change everything we believed about ourselves and our place in the cosmos. Neither of them knew how soon that moment would come. 4,000 light-years away, Ambassador Kelveth was reviewing more data about the humans. Every new piece of information made him more concerned. His aide stood beside him and read from the reports in a steady voice. The humans had only developed writing about 5,000 years ago. Before that, they had passed down their knowledge through spoken stories. This was an incredibly short time, by galactic standards. Most species took at least 100,000 years to develop written language after achieving basic intelligence. The aide continued reading. The humans had gone from riding horses to flying aircraft in less than a century. They had gone from simple mechanical computers to global information networks in less than 50 years. They had mapped their own genetic code, and they were already beginning to modify it. Kelveth asked how this was possible. His species had taken 200,000 years to achieve the same level of technological development. The Vortan had taken even longer. How could these primitive beings advance so quickly? His aide offered a theory. He said that perhaps the humans advanced quickly because they had no choice. Their planet was trying to kill them constantly. They faced earthquakes and volcanoes and hurricanes and floods and droughts and ice ages. They were surrounded by predators and diseases and poisonous plants. Every generation faced new threats that could have wiped them out entirely. The humans had survived by adapting faster than any other species. They learned to use tools, and build shelters, and grow food. They spread across their entire planet and made homes in every environment from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. They did not wait for evolution to change their bodies. They changed their world instead. Kelveth considered this explanation. It made a certain kind of sense, but it also made him more afraid. A species that had evolved under such pressure would be incredibly dangerous. They would be used to fighting for survival. They would never give up, even when the odds were against them. They would find solutions to problems that other species would consider impossible. On Earth, Jake Morrison finished his shift on the space station and went to the sleeping quarters. He strapped himself into his sleeping bag and closed his eyes, but sleep did not come easily. He kept thinking about his grandmother and the stories she used to tell him. She had passed away 3 years ago, and he still missed her every day. She had grown up during hard times. Her family had been poor, and she had worked in factories as a young woman. She had seen wars and recessions and all kinds of hardship, but she had never stopped believing that the future would be better. She had saved money for years so that Jake could go to college. She had encouraged him to study science and reach for the stars. He wished she could see him now. He wished she could see the Earth from up here the way he saw it every day. She would have loved this view. She would have said that it proved her right. Humans could do anything if they worked hard enough and never gave up hope. Laura was in the science module running experiments on plant growth in zero gravity. She was trying to find ways for humans to grow food on long space voyages. The trip to Mars would take months, and future missions would take even longer. Humans would need to produce their own food if they wanted to explore the solar system. She thought about all the challenges that lay ahead. There were so many problems to solve. Radiation exposure, muscle loss, psychological stress, resource management. Each problem seemed impossible until someone found a solution. That was the human way. They faced impossible challenges, and they figured them out one step at a time. Far above the space station, the alien fleet continued its silent observation. Thousands of scientists from hundreds of species studied every aspect of human civilization. They watched human television broadcasts and learned human languages. They observed human behavior patterns and tried to understand human psychology. What they found continued to amaze and disturb them. The humans created something called fiction. They told stories about events that never happened and people who never existed. They spent enormous amounts of time and resources creating these false narratives. They built entire industries around producing fictional entertainment. No other species in the collective did this. Other intelligent beings recorded facts and history. They shared practical information that helped with survival. The idea of inventing stories for pleasure was completely foreign to them. The humans also created something called art. They made images and sculptures and music that served no practical purpose at all. They decorated their buildings and their bodies. They spent years learning to play instruments or paint pictures They valued these skills as highly as they valued practical abilities like engineering or medicine. Kelveth stared at a human painting that his ship had intercepted from their global communications network. It showed a night sky full of swirling stars above a quiet village. The image stirred something inside him that he could not name or explain. He realized that he was beginning to understand why the humans had survived. They did not just live. They found meaning and beauty in their existence. They created things that made their lives worth living. They dreamed of possibilities that did not yet exist, and then they worked to make those dreams real. This was something the collective had lost long ago. Most species in the galaxy had achieved stability, but they had stopped growing. They maintained their civilizations, but they no longer created anything new. They had forgotten how to dream. The humans had never forgotten. They were still young and wild and full of impossible ambitions. They looked at the universe and saw not what it was, but what it could become. Then, Kelveth knew that the High Council would need to make a decision soon. The humans could not be ignored. They were too dangerous and too promising. They would either become the greatest threat the collective had ever faced or the greatest gift the universe had ever given. He hoped the Council would choose wisely. The High Council of the Galactic Collective had not assembled in full for 600 years. There had been no need. The galaxy had been peaceful and stable for so long that most species had forgotten what urgency felt like. But now, representatives from over 8,000 civilizations gathered in the great amphitheater on Nexus Prime to discuss a small blue planet that had changed everything. The amphitheater was enormous. It had been built into the heart of an artificial moon that orbited a dying star. The structure was older than most civilizations, and it had witnessed countless historic decisions. But none of those decisions had felt as important as the one they faced today. The representatives came in every possible form. Some were beings of pure energy that glowed with soft light. Some were creatures of living stone that moved slowly and thought deeply. Some were insectoid swarms that shared a single consciousness. Some were aquatic beings floating in mobile water tanks. Some were plant-like organisms that communicated through chemical signals. The diversity was overwhelming, but they all shared one thing in common. They were all afraid. Elder Vorton Prime stood at the center of the amphitheater. He was the oldest conscious entity in the known universe, and his body was barely physical anymore. He appeared as a shifting pattern of light and shadow that was difficult to look at directly. His voice echoed through the minds of every being present. He thanked them for coming and acknowledged that the journey had been long for many of them. He said that the matter before them was too important to discuss through normal channels. They needed to see each other and speak directly. The future of the galaxy depended on the decisions they made in this chamber. He began his presentation by showing them images of Earth. The small planet appeared in holographic form at the center of the amphitheater. It rotated slowly and showed its blue oceans and green continents and white clouds. It looked peaceful and beautiful from this distance. The elder explained that the humans had evolved on this world approximately 300,000 years ago. They were an unremarkable species at first. They were weaker than many predators on their planet. They were slower than many prey animals. They had no natural weapons like claws or fangs. By all rights, they should have gone extinct long before they developed intelligence. But the humans had something that no other species on their world possessed. They had the ability to imagine things that did not exist and then create them. They imagined tools and they made tools. They imagined shelters and they built shelters. They imagined language and they developed language. They imagined the future and they worked to create it. The elder showed images from human history. He showed them learning to use fire and developing agriculture. He showed them building the first cities and creating the first written records. He showed them spreading across their planet and adapting to every environment they encountered. A representative from the Crystalline Methkai Collective raised an objection. She said that many species had achieved environmental mastery. This alone was not remarkable enough to justify this assembly. The elder agreed with her and said that he was just providing context for what came next. He showed them images of human warfare. The violence was shocking to many of the assembled beings. The humans had fought each other constantly throughout their history. They had developed increasingly deadly weapons and used them without hesitation. They had committed terrible atrocities against each other based on differences in appearance or belief or geography. Several representatives expressed disgust and called for the immediate quarantine of Earth. They said that such a violent species could not be allowed to join the galactic community. They were too dangerous and too unstable, but the Elder was not finished. He showed them what happened after the wars. The humans did not simply destroy their enemies and move on. They rebuilt the nations they had defeated. They helped their former enemies recover and grow strong again. They created organizations dedicated to preventing future conflicts. They learned from their mistakes even if they did not always succeed in avoiding them. The Elder explained that this was what made the humans unique. They possessed what he called duality. They were capable of tremendous cruelty, but also tremendous compassion. They could hate and they could love with equal intensity. They could destroy and they could create with equal skill. No other species in the collective showed such extreme variations in behavior. Ambassador Kelveth stood and addressed the assembly. He said that he had been observing the humans for several cycles, and he had reached a disturbing conclusion. The humans were not insane, as some had suggested. They were something far more dangerous. They were adaptable. He explained that every other species in the collective followed predictable patterns. Once a species achieved stability, it tended to remain stable. Change happened slowly, over thousands or millions of years, but the humans changed constantly. They reinvented themselves with each generation. They abandoned old beliefs and adopted new ones. They destroyed old systems and built new systems in their place. This adaptability was what had allowed them to survive, despite their self-destructive tendencies. When they faced a crisis, they did not simply endure it. They transformed themselves to overcome it. They emerged from each challenge stronger and more capable than before. The Elder nodded and said that Kelveth had identified the core issue. The humans were unpredictable. They could not be controlled or contained through conventional means. Any attempt to limit them would only make them more determined to break free. They thrived on challenges in a way that no other species did. He asked the assembly to consider what would happen when the humans discovered that they were not alone in the universe. Would they react with fear and hostility? Would they try to compete with the collective for resources and territory? Would they see the older species as threats to be defeated or obstacles to be overcome? Or would they react with curiosity and wonder? Would they seek to learn from the collective and share their own unique gifts? Would they become allies and partners in the great work of understanding the universe? The Elder said that he did not know the answer. The humans were too different from anything the collective had encountered before. Their behavior could not be predicted with any certainty. They might become the greatest friends the galaxy had ever known, or they might become the greatest enemies. There was no way to tell. Without making contact, a long silence fell over the assembly. The weight of the decision pressed down on every representative. They were being asked to take a risk that could change the course of galactic history. Some believed it was too dangerous. Others believed it was necessary. Finally, the Elder spoke again. He said that hiding from the humans was not an option. They were advancing too quickly. Within a few generations, they would develop faster than light travel on their own. They would discover the collective eventually, whether the collective wanted them to or not. The only question was whether the collective would approach them as friends or wait for them to discover the galaxy as potential enemies. The choice was theirs, but they needed to make it soon. The debate continued for many hours. Arguments were made on all sides, but in the end, the council reached a decision. They would make contact with the humans. They would send an ambassador to their world, and they would ask them the question that burned in all their minds. How had humanity survived when everything said they should have destroyed themselves? The answer to that question would determine whether the humans would be welcomed into the galactic community or isolated forever. The fate of a galaxy rested on what they would learn. Dr. Laura Bennett was presenting her research at a physics conference in Geneva when the sky changed. She was standing at a podium, explaining her latest findings on quantum entanglement, when a shadow fell across the room. The lights flickered, and a low hum filled the air. Someone in the audience pointed at the window and screamed. Laura turned and saw something that made her forget every word she had ever learned. A ship hung in the sky, above the city. It was massive and elegant, and it glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was shaped like nothing she had ever seen before. It was clearly not made by human hands. She walked to the window in a daze, while chaos erupted around her. People were running, and shouting, and crying. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Some pulled out their phones to take pictures. Some simply stood frozen like Laura, unable to process what they were seeing. The news spread across the planet within minutes. Every television channel showed the same images. Every social media platform crashed under the weight of billions of simultaneous posts. World leaders made emergency broadcasts calling for calm. Military forces mobilized around the globe. Religious figures offered prayers or proclamations depending on their beliefs. Jake Morrison was in Houston when he heard the news. He had returned from the International Space Station just 3 days earlier, and he was still adjusting to gravity. He sat in a briefing room at NASA headquarters and watched the footage on a large screen with dozens of other astronauts and scientists. General Patricia Lane entered the room, and everyone stood at attention. She was a tall woman, with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too many crises to be surprised by anything. She told them to sit down and listen carefully. She explained that the president had formed a first contact committee and that several people in this room had been selected to serve on it. Jake Morrison was one of them. Dr. Laura Bennett was being flown in from Geneva. Diplomats and linguists and military advisors were being gathered from around the world. Jake asked why he had been chosen. He was just a pilot. He had no special training in diplomacy or alien contact protocols. General Lane looked at him with something that might have been respect. She said that he had spent more time in space than almost any other human being alive. He had seen Earth from orbit hundreds of times. He understood how small and fragile their world was in the vastness of space. She said that perspective might be exactly what they needed. The committee assembled in Geneva within 24 hours. They set up a command center in a secure building near the site where the alien ship had appeared. Laura was there, looking exhausted, but alert. Jake shook her hand and told her it was good to see her again. She laughed and said that she had always hoped they would meet aliens someday, but she had imagined it happening differently. The ship had not moved or communicated since its arrival. It simply hung in the sky, like a silent question waiting for an answer. The committee debated what to do. Some wanted to attempt radio communication. Some wanted to wait for the aliens to make the first move. Some wanted to prepare military defenses just in case. Then the ship spoke. The message appeared in every language simultaneously on every screen and speaker on the planet. It said that they came in peace. It said that they represented an organization called the Galactic Collective. It said that they had been observing humanity for some time and they wished to meet face to face. It requested that a single representative be sent to their vessel. The debate over who to send lasted for hours. Politicians wanted a diplomat. Scientists wanted a researcher. Military leaders wanted a soldier. In the end, General Lane made the decision herself. She chose Jake Morrison. Jake asked her again why she was choosing him. She said that the aliens had been watching humanity for a while. They probably knew all about human politics and military power. What they needed to see was a human being who represented the best of what humanity could be. Someone who dreamed of the stars and worked to reach them. Someone who believed in possibilities rather than limitations. Jake put on a simple uniform and walked toward the alien ship alone. No weapons. No communication devices. Just a man taking the longest walk of his life. The ship lowered a ramp of solid light, and he climbed it one step at a time. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The interior of the ship was beautiful and strange. The walls seemed to be made of flowing liquid that held its shape through some unknown force. The light came from everywhere at once and cast no shadows. The air was cool and clean and smelled like nothing he had ever experienced before. A figure appeared before him. It was tall and thin with skin that shifted colors like oil on water. It had eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies within them. It moved with a grace that suggested it was not entirely physical. The being introduced itself as Ambassador Kelveth of the Galactic Collective. It said that it had traveled a very long way to ask humanity a single question. Jake straightened his back and prepared himself for anything. Kelveth leaned closer, and its form shifted with an emotion Jake could not identify. It asked him how humans had not destroyed themselves. It explained that humanity possessed the power to make their planet uninhabitable. They had possessed this power for generations. Every other species the collective had observed with such capability had destroyed themselves. Yet humans were still here. Not just surviving, but thriving. How was this possible? Jake had expected many questions, but not this one. He thought about his grandmother and the stories she told him about the stars. He thought about Laura and her endless scientific curiosity. He thought about General Lane and her dedication to protecting humanity. He thought about every human being who had ever looked up at the sky and dared to dream. He told the ambassador that humans never stopped hoping that tomorrow would be better than today. Even when everything seemed hopeless. Even when they had every reason to give up. They hoped, and they worked to make that hope real. Kelveth repeated the word hope as if tasting it for the first time. It asked if this was what prevented human extinction. Jake said that hope was not just about prevention. It was about purpose. Humans did not just want to survive. They wanted to matter. They wanted to build something that would outlast them. They wanted to touch the stars, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. Doing hard things was how humans proved to themselves that they were truly alive. The ambassador was silent for a long moment. Then it did something Jake did not expect. It bowed. It said that the collective had grown old and tired. They had achieved stability, but lost their purpose. They had forgotten what it felt like to dream of impossible things. The humans had reminded them of something precious that they had lost long ago. It told Jake that humanity would be welcomed into the galactic community. Not as students or subordinates, but as equals. The collective had much to teach them, but perhaps the humans had even more to teach in return. Jake felt tears forming in his eyes. He thought about his grandmother and wished she could see this moment. He had touched the stars at last, and he had found friends waiting for him among them. The universe would never be the same again. 50 years had passed since the day the alien ship appeared above Geneva. The world had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Humanity had not only survived first contact, they had thrived in ways that astonished even their new galactic neighbors. Dr. Laura Bennett stood at the window of her office in the Department of Interstellar Relations. The building was located in New Geneva, which had grown from a small Swiss city into the diplomatic capital of Earth. Ships from 100 different worlds passed through the sky above her. Each one carried beings who had once thought of humans as primitive or dangerous. Now they came as students and partners and friends. Laura was 73 years old, but advanced medical technology from the collective had kept her healthy and strong. She could expect to live another century at least. She had used those extra years well. As Earth's first galactic ambassador, she had negotiated humanity's entry into the collective. She had established trade agreements and cultural exchanges. She had turned fear into curiosity and suspicion into cooperation. Her assistant knocked on the door and told her that Admiral Morrison was calling from the Outer Rim. Laura smiled and accepted the connection. Jake's face appeared on her screen, looking weathered, but happy. He was commanding humanity's first deep space exploration fleet. They had traveled farther from Earth than any human had ever gone before. Jake told her that they had discovered something incredible. A new star system with 3 habitable planets. None of them were claimed by any collective species. He was requesting permission to establish the first human colony beyond the solar system. Laura laughed and told him that she would push the paperwork through immediately. Jake thanked her and said that his grandmother would have loved to see this. He said that she had always believed humans were meant to live among the stars. Laura agreed and told him to be careful out there. He promised to come home soon and ended the call. The impact of humanity on the Galactic Collective had been profound and unexpected. Species that had stagnated for millions of years suddenly found themselves fascinated by human art and music and literature. The concept of fiction had spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Beings who had only ever recorded facts now experimented with imaginary stories for the first time. Human philosophy had transformed ancient civilizations. The idea that meaning could be created, rather than discovered, had given purpose to species that had existed in comfortable emptiness for eons. The concept of hope as a driving force rather than passive waiting had inspired new movements across thousands of worlds. Human technology had offered solutions to problems the collective had abandoned as unsolvable. Where other species approached challenges with careful, methodical planning, humans threw themselves at problems with wild creativity and stubborn determination. They failed often, but they learned from each failure. They tried approaches that seemed ridiculous until they worked. The Vortan had been particularly affected by their contact with humanity. The ancient beings had spent 3 billion years observing the universe without truly participating in it. They had become so detached that they had forgotten what it felt like to care about anything. The humans had reminded them of something they had lost. Elder Vortan Prime had addressed the High Council on the 50th anniversary of First Contact. He had spoken about how the humans had changed the galaxy simply by being themselves. He had said that the collective had been dying slowly without realizing it. Stability had become stagnation. Peace had become emptiness. The humans had brought chaos and unpredictability back into a universe that had grown too orderly. He had called it a gift. Not all species agreed with this assessment. Some still viewed the humans as dangerous and disruptive. Some resented the changes that human influence had brought. But most recognized that the galaxy was more alive now than it had been in millions of years. On Earth, life continued in its wonderfully chaotic way. People still argued about politics and worried about money. They still fell in love and had their hearts broken. They still dreamed of better tomorrows and worked to make those dreams real. The presence of aliens in the sky had not changed the fundamental nature of humanity. It had simply given them new horizons to reach for. Emma Morrison was 12 years old, and she lived with her grandfather in the same Ohio town where he had grown up. Jake had retired from active duty 5 years ago, after his wife passed away. He had returned to his roots to raise his granddaughter and to remember where his journey had begun. They sat together on the porch on a warm summer night, looking up at the stars. The sky was fuller now than it had been in his childhood. Satellites and ships crossed overhead in a constant stream of activity, but the stars themselves remained unchanged. They burned with the same ancient light that his grandmother had shown him so many years ago. Emma asked him why the aliens thought humans were so special. She had learned about First Contact in school, but the textbooks did not capture what it had really been like. She wanted to hear the story from someone who had lived it. Jake smiled and thought about how to answer. He told her about the Galactic Collective and how they had watched humans for years before making contact. He told her about Ambassador Kelveth and the question that had brought them across the galaxy. He told her about hope and purpose and the human refusal to give up even when everything seemed impossible. Emma listened with wide eyes and asked if the aliens really thought humans were better than them. Jake shook his head and said that was not quite right. The aliens had achieved things that humans were still working toward. They had wisdom and knowledge and technology that far surpassed anything on Earth. But they had lost something along the way. They had forgotten how to dream. Humans had never forgotten. Even when they were fighting each other and making terrible mistakes, they never stopped believing that the future could be better. They never stopped reaching for things that seemed out of reach. They never stopped creating beauty and meaning in a universe that offered neither. That was what made humans special. Not their intelligence or their technology or their strength, their stubborn insistence on hoping for better things, even when hope seemed foolish, their determination to matter in a universe that did not care whether they existed or not. Emma nodded slowly as if she understood something important for the first time. She looked up at the stars and pointed at a bright light moving across the sky. She asked if that was one of the alien ships. Jake said that it probably was. He said that ships from dozens of different worlds visited Earth every day now. They came to trade, and to learn, and to experience human culture. They came because humanity had something valuable to offer. Not resources or territory, but something far more precious. A reminder of what it felt like to be alive. Emma smiled and said that she wanted to be an explorer when she grew up. She wanted to see the places her grandfather had discovered, and find new places of her own. Jake put his arm around her and told her that she could do anything she set her mind to. That was the human way. Above them, the stars continued their ancient dance. Ships from 100 worlds crossed the night sky, carrying beings who had learned to dream again. The galaxy that had once frozen in stunned amazement at the discovery of Earth now pulsed with new life and new possibilities. And in a small town in Ohio, a grandfather and granddaughter looked up at the universe together just as generations before them had done. The sky was bigger now, but the wonder remained the same. Humanity had taught the galaxy how to dream again. And in return, the galaxy had given humanity something even greater. A place among the stars, and proof that they had always belonged there. The story was not over. It was only beginning. But whatever came next, one thing was certain. The humans would face it together with hope in their hearts, and their eyes fixed firmly on the future. That was who they were. That was who they had always been. And that was why the universe would never be the same again.